Think we're still trying to patch some folks in, make sure we've got our people online available, but I want to go ahead and call our Ways and Means Committee meeting to order. Welcome everybody. Wish everyone a happy new year. Thank you for being here today. Doc Newton, do you mind opening us up with a word of prayer, please, sir?
Pray with me. Father, thank you for the opportunity to serve. Thank you for the opportunity to serve Georgians, but also to serve you. Help us to do it with wisdom. Give us that wisdom that we need as we hear. Thank you for the blessing of working with so many wonderful people, and help us to keep you foremost and those in Georgia with foremost as we decide things. Thank you, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. Hope everybody had a good holiday. And again, we're getting an early jump on this because audit said these ready a little earlier this year, I think, than last. We had this meeting towards the end of session in 2023, and we're trying to get a little bit of a jump start on this overview. I know we'll have some more time to dive deeper. But Matt, thank you so much for being here, and thank you to audits for handling these things. And we'll try to be as, I don't know, I guess expeditious and judicious with people's time today as possible. And hopefully you'll hang around or be available during session with some questions if some of our members want to take a little bit of a deeper dive on some of this stuff. But thanks again for being here. I'm going to turn the floor over to you, and we'll hear what y'all got for us.
Well, thank you for having me here today. Again, my name is Matt Taylor. I'm with the Department of Audit's Performance Audit Division. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss these reports. There are researchers here from Georgia State University and from Georgia Southern University today that can assist with some questions on these reports if you have them. The University of Georgia could not be here today. Get started. So first, a quick overview of the law, the Senate Bill 6 in 21. The law was passed in 21. The reports include a 5-year projection of change in economic activity, state revenue, expenditures, and public benefit. The chairs of the Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee can request up to 5 reports each year, and the first requests were completed last year. There are several players involved in this, the Department of Audits and the contractors that I mentioned earlier. They actually complete the reports. These are products of the schools, not of the Department of Audits. The law requires these to be contracted out. What we do is we assign the projects, we review the drafts, we provide comments for clarity, trying to make them a little clearer, or if we have questions, and then we create summaries. And then obviously we do some presentations. This is the list of the 23 requests by committee. See that we had 5 requests from the Ways and Means Committee listed there. We received 4 from Senate Finance. One of those was a bit unusual in that it is unlike the others, the exemptions for nonprofit hospitals. That was looking at 3 different exemptions, and it was not looking at them individually, it's looking at them collectively, basically the benefit of those exemptions in relation to the cost. And this is a second listing of those 9 requests by the primary beneficiary. So I was going to talk today about these as either business incentives or individual. So the beneficiaries, those is the
Matt, can I just interrupt you real quick 1
Yes.
second, just so that there's some folks in the room here. We drew a bit of a crowd, and I just wanted to make sure that not only the committee members, but also them understood that from a Ways and Means approach, that without duplication, we have gone from the largest down
Yes.
the list. So I wanted to maybe kind of give them a reasoning behind the ones that were chosen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. So this list, we look at who the incentive is intended to benefit and try to categorize these for the discussion today. So you see the ones on the left are more business incentives, and those on the right are targeted to individuals. That doesn't mean that an individual cannot claim on a return. For instance, the film tax credit can be claimed on an individual return, but obviously the purpose of that credit is targeted to business versus individuals. So the 9, they're 6 business and 3 individual. So the law for these tax incentive evaluations requires kind of similar analysis for each, the 4 that I mentioned previously, but not all incentives have the same purpose, despite the analysis needing to be similar. Many of the incentives reviewed do not appear to have been created specifically to spur economic activity. There are other reasons to create incentives, and these get reviewed in the same way. So just lowering taxes on citizens, like a prescription drug sales tax exemption, is probably the purpose is not stated in the law for many of these exemptions, but it's probably not for the purpose of creating jobs in the same way that the job tax credit, for instance. But these would be analyzed in a similar way because that's what the law is dictated. So we also have, incentives that are for other policy purposes, like the rural hospital tax credit or, the hospital exemptions, for instance, that may not be economic development as the primary purpose of them. So I have some examples there on the slide. So The first business incentives that I was going to talk about is the agricultural sales tax exemption. That is GATE, that many of you are probably familiar with, the sales tax exemptions. There's the film tax credit, which you're probably also familiar with. It's 20 to 30% on qualified production expenditures. There's a music investment tax credit. This expired at the end of 2022. We were asked to look at this. It was in place for 6 years. It was a 15% qualified expenditure credit. And then the quality jobs tax credit, you can see there that varies by amount. It varies by tier. There's several different criteria for the amount and qualifications for the quality job tax credits. And it's available for up to 5 years for the eligible jobs. There are two other business incentives: the special deduction for life insurance companies, and that life insurance companies be charged premium taxes by local governments, and that amount can be deducted from the amount they owe to the state. So that's a kind of a different type of business incentive. And then the exemptions on the nonprofit hospitals, which are the state sales and property taxes. Some states require nonprofit hospitals to pay some of these, but these types of exemptions are not uncommon either. So this next slide is about the typical business incentive analysis. The economists here can speak to this in great detail, but business incentives analysis typically involved in-plan. We've talked about this before. That shows that this table that you see here shows the results of an in-plan analysis, where they report employment or jobs, labor income, value added, and output. And value added is basically the contribution to the state's economy. And you have the three rows. That's the direct beneficiary. So the companies receiving the incentive. Then the indirect are the suppliers to those companies, and then the induced are the employees of those companies. Basically, all the labor income that comes from those first two, the spending of those, the spending of the employee income and what that does for the economy. So when you hear about the ripple effect is considered in all of these analyses. So when we talk about the total jobs, we're talking about that bottom row, not just the jobs within the entities receiving the incentive directly. A business incentive analysis will also include a but-for percentage, and that's the portion of the activity that can be attributed to that incentive. So not every job that receives the job tax credit is only there because of the job tax credit. Some would exist otherwise. And so the researchers try to account for that to say, what is the incentive itself actually resulting in? So this is some of the results. So there's a few slides here of results, kind of the big numbers from these studies. Now, I would caution you not to look at 3 or 4 numbers and believe that that's a thorough analysis of these incentives. These reports tend to be a bit longer. They're 20 to 40 pages, and there's lots of nuance that cannot be captured in a quick presentation when I'm covering 9 different incentives. But these are kind of the high points, and I think they're a good starting point for evaluation. So there are a couple incentives that will not be that are not shown here. The music investment tax credit is not listed here. The analysis was hypothetical because during that 6-year period, there were actually no incentivized. There were no applications approved for the credit, so no one received that credit. So they didn't have any actual data to go off of. They looked at some of the applications that were submitted that were not approved, and then tried to determine what the impact would have been had those happened. But I thought we shouldn't compare those to these others. And then the nonprofit hospital being very different, since that's not a single incentive, I did not include those in this slide. So what you see there is the 4 that are shown. This foregone revenue is the amount that you would see like in a tax. Well, it's the It's the amount of the credit in a given year, in a representative year, or the amount of the exemption, what would have been collected by the state had that the incentive not existed. So that's the foregone revenue. The jobs are the total jobs, and then that cost per job. And this is, if any of you do the math very quickly, you'll see that this math doesn't quite work here, because the cost per job is the net revenue foregone, not the total that you're seeing on the slide. So I'll do that. So if the foregone revenue that you see there, the 155 million for GATE, the agricultural sales tax exemption, that is the foregone revenue. But if the economic activity associated with that means the state collects another 20 million, for instance, then the net revenue loss to the state would be 135. And that would be the number that's divided into the jobs, because that's the actual cost to the state. It's the net. A couple slides later, I'll talk about the return to the state. But what I wanted to point out is that cost per job, and on the next slide, it is the middle column divided by the net foregone revenue, not the total foregone revenue. Is that clear?
Well, just please ask your question. I just want to make sure we try to get through the presentation and save as many of these for later. You 12, Chuck?
Yes, sir.
Chairman
Yes, sir.
Martin, excuse me.
Yes, sir. And it's directly related to that. So if I were to want to get what the net number would be, I would then multiply jobs times cost per job. And the delta would between
That is correct.
and so the delta between those two would then be the presumed other taxes that came
that's
as a
correct.
result of that activity.
And I do have a slide, 2 slides later, I talk about the fiscal return on investment.
Okay, that's fine. I
right.
just wanted to make sure I had the calculation. I'll let you get
Right,
on with your program.
I woke up this morning early thinking that I wish I'd presented this differently, but I decided it was a little late.
Hey,
So-
the Alabama wish
Sure.
they hadn't run a quarterback draw too.
That's right. That's right. So what you do see on this one, the quality jobs tax credit is particularly low. And you see the special deduction for life insurance companies, that cost per job is very high. You also, but this kind of goes back to the earlier slide. What is the purpose of the incentive? And the incentive for the special deduction for life insurance companies appears to be to make sure that the total tax charged is not exceptionally high. We have a 2.25% state premium tax, and then they're charged 1% by locals. But the 2.25 is pretty similar to other states, and so it appears that many years ago, again, the purpose is not stated, but it seems like the decision was made. We're going to let the locals, but we're not. We're going to let the locals collect tax revenue on insurance premiums, but we don't think the company should be paying more than they were already paying. It was kind of a redirection of the state premium tax to local governments, essentially. Yeah. But that's why the cost per job is very different there. It doesn't appear that was created specifically the purpose of driving job creation. Okay. So this next slide to get order. Okay. Is showing the value added. That's the contribution to the state's economy. Again, that foregone revenue, you would want to consider the net when you look at the economic growth per $1. So again, the quality jobs kind of stands out here as contributing significantly to the state's economy for each dollar in net foregone revenue that the state has, and the others are significantly less. And the third and final slide related to this is the foregone revenue and then the new state revenue. And so this is basically the return on investment that I frequently hear about. But this is the fiscal return on investment versus the prior one, which is more economic. So this gets you the net. The 2 columns of that will get you the net foregone revenue. What I was thinking, putting this third, was not emphasizing this at the expense of the other 2, because so I kind of put this third and then decided that, well, it'd have been nice for you to see the net revenue first, maybe. But you see that the none of these, return as much to the state as collected, but I don't know that that's really the purpose of many incentives. So, one thing that's not noted here, that's noted to varying degrees in the report, in the different reports, is the impact on local governments. So the law says net change in state revenue and in state costs, but some of the researchers also note the local impacts. And there are local revenue gains resulting from these incentives because of the economic activity. There, in some cases, there are local revenue losses. I mean, if it's a sales tax exemption, the locals, it applies to the locals in most cases. I think grocery is an exception, but with something like gate, that's also a local sales tax exemption. So we talk about the foregone revenue to the state. There is also foregone revenue to locals. But again, there's also additional revenue and additional activity to locals that are not captured in these reports. And so the two that I was unable to put in the tables, I wanted to mention those a little bit. This is the music tax credit. I think I've mentioned this already. It was the 6 years and how Georgia Southern looked at the applications that were not approved. These were relatively small activities these applications were relatively small projects. They would have resulted in about 45 jobs, and the foregone revenue would have been just over $500,000 for those. And kind of the larger one that was not in there is the nonprofit hospital tax exemptions. The foregone state revenue is income tax and sales tax revenue, and the foregone local is sales tax and property tax revenue. And you see that's $263 million. The hospitals report data to the Department of Community Health that allowed for this analysis of government and for-profit and nonprofit hospitals. So there's a comparison in there. This data was used by the researchers so they could isolate the charity care provided by nonprofits. So all hospitals provide some. So you needed to be able to look at both types or multiple types and say, are nonprofits providing it at a higher level than for-profits or the other types of hospitals? And what you see here is that there is a clear difference. That final line in the second table is the charity care attributable to the nonprofit status, that just over $1 billion. So it's clear that the nonprofit status has an impact. But one thing that I would note is that number is fairly high. It is based on the retail charges that hospitals report to DCH. So that is what they are to report to DCH. What they would report in a 990 to the IRS would be the cost of providing the care, which is going to be a lower number. So if it was looked at that way, those numbers would be lower, but the nonprofit status clearly has an impact. But it's not isolated what that dollar would be if you were looking at it a different way. But the IRS does not collect that same data on for-profit hospitals, and they don't have a reason. So Georgia State had to use the source that included all types of hospitals so they could isolate the nonprofit impact. So that's why you have those numbers. But I did want you to know that number, if you've seen any national studies on this topic, which there have been quite a few, the numbers are typically lower, and they are using a source that shows a lower amount of charity care. So the next slide are the 3 individual incentives. This is a credit for taxes paid to another state. So that's for Georgia residents that work somewhere else and collected income in another state and paid taxes there. They get a credit against their Georgia taxes. Georgia excludes from state income taxes Social Security benefits that the federal government began taxing, I think, in the early 80s. And there's a lottery ticket sales tax exemption also here. So you buy a lottery ticket, you don't pay sales tax here. We consider that we group that as an individual incentive because it's at the point of sale with individuals. It could be looked at as an exemption to spur, kind of the lottery industry. So it can be analyzed differently by researchers and how they might do that. And in fact, that's actually what happened. as had an earlier slide about how a business incentive analysis typically looks within plan. They are done somewhat similarly for individuals, but there's a important difference in most of these, and that is there is no direct or indirect effect. So what you have with an individual incentive, the way it's typically modeled, is that you are not paying sales tax on your prescriptions, for instance, and therefore that 7% or 4% state money you still have to spend, and then you go spend it some other way. And so just like in the business incentive, that third line of induced effect, that is employees spending the money that they have that they've gotten from their jobs, this is treated kind of the same way. This is, you've got extra money because we did not charge sales tax, and then you went and spent that. And so you see an induced effect, and that becomes the total effect of the individual incentive. And so that's how those analyses, they still use in plan, but it's done differently. And then in that case, you don't have a but-for percentage that you see in the other. It's no longer relevant to determine what portion of the activity occurred because of the incentive. I mean, you're assuming that if people have $1 that they would not have had, they go spend it. It's all because of the fact that they had the exemption, the full amount. So the individual incentives, the purpose of these tends to be different. They are generally not about economic development. They are likely not double taxing people on income they've made in another state and they've already paid taxes, or just a decision made 40 years ago not to go along with the federal government taxation of Social Security benefits. And so not specifically economic development. So, but we have those same measures in the studies. And so you see a higher cost per job here, see fewer jobs associated with this. The lottery ticket is a little bit different because there's also education funds. So the foregone revenue is the tax revenue that we don't collect on lottery tickets, but there is another source of money coming in. You have the economic activity of people not having to pay the taxes, just like you have on other tax, something like grocery store sales tax, where you get additional activity because people have money to spend in other ways. The same is true for lottery, but the state also gets a portion of the lottery ticket sales. So that's the second line, the education funds. There's additional money coming into the state. In addition to that economic activity tax revenue, you're also getting revenue from the purchase itself. You're selling the tickets. And so there's the education funds you're getting a portion of. And so the cost per job, when you consider those, is much lower. And that shows in this next slide, the value added. This is the contribution to the state economy. And then the third one, which is the new state revenue and the foregone revenue. Because there's not a lot of economic activity associated with those first two, you don't see a significant return to the state for that foregone revenue. But again, with the lottery ticket sales, you do when you consider the education funds, it's much higher. And that's what I've got. That was the end.
Looks like we have a few burning questions here, Matt. And I know you said you had in attendance, so just wanted to recognize, or if you
Yes.
want to recognize the
So we have
the teams that did the audits.
Yeah, so we have from Georgia State, Dr. Peter Bluestone, Dr. Carly Ann Patrick, I don't know if Dr. Nick Warner, if he's here, and then from Georgia Southern, we have Benjamin McKay, and they will be able to help assist with any questions that you have.
Well, I will direct them to the podium if some questions are directed that you see fit to show them, get them to show us what it is. But I appreciate the overview. It gives us a better launching pad from which to dive into this, and the ability to know maybe in the future what might be better standardization for y'all that we have discussed in the past. I think Representative Bentley, I'm sorry. I think it's Stinson now, isn't it? Okay. was first.
Not a problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Happy New Year to everyone. And I was listening on my ride in, so thank you for your presentation. I'm still trying to wrap my head around paying taxes on caskets, but not on lottery tickets, but that's not my question. My question is, how can I get information relating to the revenue, the foregoing revenue to local governments from the Georgia agricultural sales tax exemption? Is there some way I can get some data on how that's impact our local governments, particularly in my district?
Well, so that was a UGA report. UGA is
Okay.
not here, but I am 90% confident that they included the local foregone revenue in that report. Now it's not by jurisdiction. I mean,
Okay.
it's statewide.
All righty.
And the state and local on sales tax exemptions, the state and local are fairly similar. I mean, the study will say, I think they use 7.35%. So 4% is state and then 3.35% is local. So it's kind of that portion. If it was 4 and 4, it would just be an equal amount.
Okay, you say 4% state.
And I think they use statewide average 3.35%.
For local.
Right. But I
Okay.
believe it is in that report.
Okay.
And if it's not, I can get you the number.
And how can I get the copy of that report?
Report.
You said it's UGA report?
Yes. So
Okay.
this slide that's up right here, the final slide, we have a link to a page that we have on the Department of Audit site of tax incentive evaluation. So it's kind of an overview. And then on the right side, we have all the evaluations for 23 and then all the ones for 22. But I can send you a copy.
Sure. All righty, well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'm gonna try to jump around, get these in as best order as I can tell. Who's 16 over there? Is it? Yes, sir.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Thanks again for your report. I'm thinking back on the film tax credit specifically in 2008. In September, the GM plant closed in Doraville. 3,100 people lost their jobs. A lot of those folks lost their homes. It's a very, very difficult time for us. We couldn't get anybody to come in and take over that plant, to do anything with it, from tourism to making widgets, cars, whatever. Nothing. Nobody wanted it until recently, whenever we've gotten the film industry moved in and invested what's going to be a 4,000 job production studio. How did you account? The film tax credit, of course, is only for those people that make films. How did you account for the billions of dollars of investments in these film studios that don't get a dime and the public is not exposed to any of this incentive?
I'll let Dr. Bluestone speak to that because he'll do a better job than I will. I can start off by letting you know that the study included tourism and studio construction, and it notes that there is not a credit going to either of those. And we did the same thing in the Department of Audit study. We also included studio construction, the economic impact of that. But
Yes. What we look at is the overall spending. You've often heard the number $4.2 billion. We use that number for 2022. And that's the number that we have from DOR for all the spending that's associated with the credit. So Implan looks at the film industry, which has its own code in Implan, and that includes those activities you're describing, right? It includes activities at studios. It includes, different types of location filming and things like that. That's all built into the model. So the key thing that we do is we try to distinguish between spending that's going to this in-state, right? That's flowing through the state, and spending that's leaving the state, going to folks that are estimated to reside in other places. So to answer your question, the model does take into account all that activity that is in Georgia from those studios and that spending that is incorporated in that 4.2 million. And then there's those additional effects from suppliers, right? You could have people that are building sets or providing catering. That's included in the model. And then it goes down to that third effect, right, where those people have income and they spend it in the local economy. They go out to restaurants, they buy healthcare, they rent houses or buy houses. And again, all those things are included in the model.
But you're specifically asking about like studio construction that does not receive a credit. So the studio, the production companies would not be reporting to revenue.
Correct. They
That
don't get
spending.
any of that
Right.
spending at all. And here's the issue, but before you answer the question, $1 billion in Caterpillar, $1 billion in what was Baxter, and Hyundai down in our area, massive investments which receive these tax incentives. They don't get it when they build these. And your report started, as I recall, 2017. That was before this massive investment in a dilapidated World War I facility which was going to stay empty, by the way. And this investment is done with the promise that the film industry is going to remain intact. They're not getting this.
We do include the construction spending for the representative year that we have data for. So any construction that was done in that 2022 that we have data for DOR, that is included, and those jobs are included for that year.
But to be clear, they don't get the incentive.
That's
No,
correct.
they don't.
Correct.
I mean, they don't get an incentive for that construction. The
Correct.
construction spending is not incentivized.
Correct.
And
Thank you.
it's not captured as, I mean, the economic activity is captured in the report, but the report's clear there's no cost associated with that. The cost is associated with the credits claimed, that revenue for the production spending.
My point, Mr. Chairman, and this is the only thing that I'll say, is none of these billions of dollars would have been spent were it not for the incentive.
Yes.
Bricks and mortar.
Yes. I mean,
Thank
the but for percentage in the report is very
I'm sure the
high.
gentleman believes that to be true. How about that? Thank you, Chairman Stevens. 25, Doc Newton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. I'm wrapping my brain a little bit around a couple of different things, in particular the quality jobs tax credit, which is a much smaller number, but I do know that it's a 5-year plan. It's a 5 years, as long as those jobs are 110% of the county in which they're located.
Yes.
For example, do you calculate anything for year 6 or 8 or 10 if the jobs are still there? I know they have to be there for the 5 years to get it. This program's been going on since 1990. Couldn't there be
Yes.
jobs that are still in effect that are really, if you were to use the same calculation, would you not have, just because it costs the state nothing in year 6, doesn't mean there wasn't an economic benefit, or for another
Correct.
job in year 9 or 12 or.
And I think Georgia Southern did a good job in their report this year. They have some tables in the back projecting jobs out for 10 years. So they show a cost for the first 5 years for those jobs, and then the fact that there is no cost, but there is economic activity. And I think they kind of projected the job loss, the separation. So it's not the same number of jobs for 10 years, but yeah, Benjamin McKay can probably speak to that a little better.
The interesting part really about the quality jobs compared to other tax credits that we've looked at is that it really attracts projects that are multi-year in nature. So you end up in a situation where you're adding 50 jobs in the first year, 100 in the second, 200 in the third, and they grow from there. And then there's the carry forward period that really brings it out to the 10 years. So in the report, we did look at all of what happens for the jobs awarded in 21, how those would break down across the next 10 years or so.
If I might continue, thank you. That helped. But real quick, just like a local property tax abatement, it finally phases out, at least my understanding. I know that's a local decision, although there may be a state component to some of the construction and all that phases out. Is that the case with the quality jobs tax credit and many others?
In the case of the quality jobs, the incentive only covers the one year of award as far from our analysis. So whatever was claimed in year, whatever was claimed in that year is the only time that those jobs can be counted.
Okay, thank you. And the other piece, I guess, just for a follow-up, at some point, the but-for calculation sounds like that's nationwide, that we come up with the idea of how many jobs would be here. For example, once you've built an auto plant, 5 years from now, they're not going to close it typically if their tax credits have run out. You think that they'll still be here.
Right.
One would hope.
Okay, thank you.
I should have brought up when I was talking about the jobs earlier, that it's something to definitely consider when you're looking at the jobs numbers for these incentives. What do they mean? Not all jobs are the same. Some are temporary. They're while you have the incentive and then it's gone. And then there are others that are going to last, that you would expect to last longer, like the quality jobs. I mean, someone builds a manufacturing facility, you've incentivized the job for 5 years. Is a facility closed in year 6, and the expectation it would be that you would not expect to see that.
That got you, Doc? Okay. Chairman Newton, I should say, Chairman Martin.
My question is similar on the lottery ticket sales. Was there any, I mean, obviously if we were charging 7% on those, that would just mean 93% goes into to be divided. So, I mean, we get it as the state and locals would get it as sales tax as opposed to the Hope Scholarship getting it. I mean, that's just the bottom line of that. Because I'm assuming there was some price elasticity testing done here. I mean, I just wonder what the demand curve for lottery tickets looks like when you walk in the place and a lottery ticket costs you $1.07. I got to think that's very crimping. And was that part of the study at all?
That was a UGA study, and they're not here.
Okay.
But what they assumed that there was that people had basically a fixed budget for lottery tickets. So if you were going to spend $50, you're spending $50, and if you charge a sales tax, they're still only going to spend $50. That's correct.
Okay,
that's correct.
But and if that assumption is valid, I'm going to assume that was one of the case. So then to really look at that is just a question of do we take that money in sales tax and take it directly out of the Hope Scholarship and what it funds? If they're going to spend the 50,
right,
X dollars go in, you divide it. Okay, thank you. That's what I was wondering about the price elasticity and they assumed it was. I forget which way to say this. I've been out of economics. It's not very elastic, right? That's the purchasing pattern there would be non-elastic if you move the price and.
We'll send it back to
it would be
the
elastic, I believe, because
economics
they
class.
changed.
We'll send you to
I gotta go
101.
back to econ 101.
They bought fewer because of the price, and so therefore it's elastic.
Yes, it's just
Right.
material.
Representative Ridley.
Thank you. Back to what Chairman Stevens was talking about on the movie industry thing. I'm just trying to get my head around this thing a little bit more. They do get the 30% tax credit whenever they do build a production facility or rehab one or something like that. Is that correct?
No, they get it on production expenditures for an actual production.
So once they build the building, if I'm a production company, then I go in and lease the facility from them, then I get the 30% discount in the tax credit. Is that the way that works? Okay.
Yes, the production company gets it.
Whenever y'all did y'all study, and I know it was kind of a combined deal, just for not to get me lost, which ain't hard to do. Is it making money or losing money?
From the fiscal return on investment, it returns less to the state in tax dollars than it costs the state. But if you're looking at it from the economic return, so there's an economic return and there's a fiscal return, but to the state receives less revenue from that economic activity than it puts into it.
And then you said from an economic standpoint,
That's $2 billion back.
Let's see. This one. It's this slide. So that value added is just the contribution to the state's economy.
okay, so
you
that
see
would
all
be
of this.
like this facility that was worth nothing basically. Now it's worth $1 billion or whatever they spelled on it.
I definitely would ask Peter to answer that question.
Okay.
Can you explain the value added a little bit better?
So value added is trying to get at what we think of as you know, in the national terms, gross domestic product, in the state, gross state product. And it's, you know, we can think about like a cost of good, right? You know, if we go to the grocery store and we buy a can of peas, right? And that can of peas cost the grocer, you know, 70 cents and they sell it for $1, right? The value added is roughly that 30 cents, right? We're trying to get at what the additional amount of economic activity is generated by the economic actors. And so that's a, you know, an economic formula. So when you're thinking about a film studio, right, that started from nothing, right, and it was built, and so you would look at all the activity that went into that, the labor income that went into that, and if some of those things were produced in Georgia, some of those goods, you know, like for instance, if we have you know, lumber that's from Georgia, that would be included. But perhaps like the steel and stuff that's maybe produced in another part of the country or overseas, that wouldn't be there. So what you're seeing there is sort of a net estimate of the contributions of Georgia economic activity that increases the value of a good or service.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, just one last thing I got. Last year, I lived down in Decatur. I rented a building there, and they were shooting a movie for a month across the street there. And all the restaurants you go in, they were completely empty because they were having to shoot the movie right there. They couldn't have anybody outside. Now, I think I went around to every one of the owners through that month and just kind of talked to them because I was just kind of wanting to know what this was, how it was going. They wasn't catering from those people. People couldn't get in there to eat because they had all the parking lots full. Does any of that loss factor in, or is there even a way to come up with a number of that part?
Yeah, that's tough. So we really are stuck with aggregate numbers. And again, you know, starting from that big 4.2 billion, right? There's a breakdown. And again, in the industry codes, you know, again, that it's designated, you know, and this is, you know, based roughly on national data, like how much of that goes to catering, right? But it doesn't say from who,
Okay.
right? So, you know, the benefit, you know, again, the model assumes, and we think this is valid, right, that the catering is coming from Georgia, right? So it's additional dollars spent in Georgia, but like you say, it might be coming at the expense of other Georgia firms. One way to think about this, and we do this analysis, you know, with the Georgia World Congress Center, right? We don't want to capture just that shift, right? We want to capture new dollars. So when we look at this analysis for the Georgia World Congress Center, we're always only looking at folks that come from out of state, right? Because the assumption is if you're already in Georgia, right, you could go to you know, one of the Falcons game, or you could go, you know, to a Hawks game or something. But you could also go to the movie down the street, or you could go to the neighborhood play, or you could eat at a restaurant, right? So that's just a shift, right? If you're in state. But if you come from Alabama, right, we take that as new money.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Representative. And Chairman Dickey.
I want to ask about tax exemption for ag, Georgia's single largest industry, jobs. I don't quite understand how you would track or come up with that number for additional jobs. And I'm not sure has a lot of bearing on anything anyway, but I think every farm in Georgia depends on this gate exemption to be profitable to be there. So just my comment and my experience, but you might want to talk about that. Those numbers kind of jump out a little bit for my members committee.
They did to me too, but this was done by UGA. Dr. Tommy Shepard was a researcher. He came from their ag economics department, but he is not here today. I really can't speak to why the numbers are what they are. So the analysis was done looking at the difference in the gate value of different commodities, and then it was a fairly complicated analysis that he could explain. I cannot.
I'm sure we'll get an opportunity to that jumped out at me too. So, I mean, I think several of these we'll have a chance to follow up on and get some more information. You know, Chairman. Oh, what, if, just a second, Wait, go ahead. We'll go ahead since it pertains to that same one. Yes.
Changes made to the gate card, and I was just curious if this analysis was based on the before the changes were made to the gate card or after. But I guess that needs to be addressed to the fellow from UGA.
Well, they modeled FY 23
Okay.
forward, so I'm guessing it's accurate.
All right. So is that, okay? Yes, sir. Representative Washburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to this special deduction for life insurance companies. Now, as I understand that, so some local governments or local governments that have these insurance companies located in their jurisdictions get a portion of that tax that would be paid to the state.
So the state charges 2.25% on all premiums. And then the state allows local governments to charge 1% on premiums by life insurance companies, I guess within their jurisdiction. Is that correct, Leslie?
That's correct.
Okay.
It's the local tax is on all premiums, including life insurance and other types of insurance, but only life insurance is able to deduct it from their state premium taxes.
Okay.
How long has that been in place?
That I don't know. Is it on the one page summary?
Yeah, we didn't capture it in the summary. We produced a report in the Department of Audit's Performance Audit Division, did a premium tax, basically a primer back in 20 or 21. So we definitely have that information. It was requested by the Senate. Just basically, could you explain the premium taxes to it and all of the
not a
different
recent-
components?
It's not a recent change, but I don't know.
Right, it's been around a while.
We can.
So the net result simply is that state revenue is just shifted to the local governments where these
That is correct.
offices are located when they produce a life insurance premium and that company that's located there.
Is it based on where, I'm not sure if it's based on where the company
Yeah.
is located or if it's based on where the premium is sold.
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah. It's
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Washburn. Now I've got a few more here. If we'll try to get everybody in, but I'm going to ask that those that have questions, if you can, be as brief, concise as possible, so we can get as many of these in as we can. Understanding that we're going to take deeper dives on some of this stuff later on. Dr. Newton.
Thank you. Just one quick question, I guess, on economic growth, because we have the return on investment on state income, new state revenue and foregone revenue, and that number is whatever the delta is. But on economic growth, could you just help me with one thing? If we gave a company $75,000 to start a new job, to hire somebody, and then it turned out that person spent $20,000 on restaurants. Would the economic growth to the state be the 75 that the new job was, plus the fact that 20 was spent on restaurant food, and then the restaurant owner spent, $3,000 on childcare, and the childcare worker spent $1,000 on, I mean, are you going to get an economic growth number if you just give somebody money to start a job? First, you start with the full value of that job you gave them the money for, right? So you're always going to have an economic growth kind of bigger than the expenditure. Isn't that correct? So it ends up making it look, we could
Right.
say, well, my goodness, we had a $75,000 job. We had 150,000 or we had 120,000 in economic growth. That sounds like a good deal.
Right. Peter?
Am I understanding economic growth calculations and the fact that, first off, the 100 million you gave them, that 100 million is new. If those are, but 4% maybe comes into play. But
Yes.
you've got, first off, you got that spending, and then you multiply all that spending that got spent on whatever the living expenses. Is that right?
I
That economic
I
growth.
understand what you're asking, but
So
Professor can explain.
the short answer is you're correct. IMPLAN will always give you a bigger number than you put into it in terms of economic
Okay.
growth. You will always have economic growth. And you know, that you've surely heard the old adage, you know, garbage in, garbage out. You know, the lots of the hard work, most of the hard work in this type of modeling is discerning what's the correct number to put in. Because the model will always go through the same calculations. And to some extent, that's the benefit of the model, right? If I put in 4.2 billion in film tax spending in the industry sector for implant, I should get the same number as anybody else, right? If I'm using the same model. So it's a good way to compare. You do have to, again, be judicious in your comparison. It is modeling, so there's always going to be some room for error.
All right. And the but-for calculations, do they vary in industry? Do they automobile, film?
Yes, they vary dramatically. And again, this is where a lot of the hard work comes in, because what we're doing in the but-for analysis is trying to discern causality, right? You know, it could be somebody could say, well, yes, if the film tax credit didn't exist, none of this activity would be here. And so we've gone through and estimated some of those but-for percentages in the report. One of the ones that we estimate 2, but the one that we settled on was 92.1%, and that is a number that was generated through industry work and some polling of individuals and other methods to get at, okay, if you took away the film tax credit, you know, for every dollar that's gone, you'd still have 8 cents worth of activity, right? 92%, 8 cents.
You know, might direct you and anybody else, Doc, that we had several discussions like that, you know, over the off session, if you will, with the tax panel, and it dives in a little bit deeper. I think,
Okay.
you know, another thing that kind of goes along with that is what we heard from economic development, whereby, you know, we're, you know, being in a competitive region and a competitive, you know, with other states situation on various things, that it, you know, those, you know, but-fors, if you will, whether or not, you know, anything happens, if and that's not necessarily included in any of the in-plan models, as I understood it, is that, you know, there's a chance that we don't really know what the other offers might have been from other states, and you know, likelihood is what would have been the difference maker when we get into those discussions. But I don't want to belabor that and start a whole new discussion. I just was just, for example, you know, those are the kind of things that came up and might be worth. I believe I had 23 blinking. 23. All right. Okay. There was some blinking and then no weren't blinking. So Representative Stinson, you had another question?
I just want to be clear on this life insurance exemption. So am I understanding that for every premium that is sold, I mean, I'm sorry, every policy that is sold, a percentage of the premium goes back to the local government? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, there is a percentage of the premium that's charged as a tax. So there is a state tax and then a separate local tax on the premiums as well. So in each case, it's going to be a percentage of what they paid for the premium.
So all my education on social media, encouraging people to get life insurance, and when they get life insurance in the county that they live in, a portion of that premium goes back to the local government.
Yes.
So I'm helping my local government. Yeah.
That's
Thank you.
right.
That's what I needed to know. Thank you.
You do? Okay. All right. I won't go to Chairman Williamson.
So just, is it not true to, just to be very clear, because this $177,000 jumps out, Representative Camp was pointing out the fact that many people watching from home right now might choke on that number. But the fact of the matter is still the policyholder is paying 2.25% tax. The policyholder is being added to the premium. And it is, as I understand it, the policyholder in the where the policy is, the policyholder lives. But it is, in fact, a redirect of 1% back to the local governments that choose to pay that tax. So policyholders paying 2.25% tax, the state years ago decided to let 1% go to the locals if the locals wanted to receive that money. So it's, and I think you articulated this earlier, it's basically just a redirect of those taxes from the state coffers to local government's coffers. Is that not true?
I believe that they're charged both the 2.25% and the 1%, but then the 1% is deducted.
Well,
from
then I have a misunderstanding on that.
Well, we
We
can look at
can-
our report.
We can clarify
We'll
that.
clarify that.
That
We'll
that's-
clarify that with you.
That's totally.
I think that-
I'd appreciate that clarification.
Yeah,
because that was not my understanding.
Okay.
You may be correct.
So we're at 11. Chairman Martin, do you have a 30-second one?
Mine goes along that. So two things with Chairman Williamson was asking about. I'd like to make sure the situs, if where the local money goes, if it's actually where I find it hard to believe it's actually where the policy holder is living, because the policyholder moves around. They don't know. So I'd like to know the situs of that. And I would also like to know the chronology. I'd like to know that if the 2.5% exists and then the state allowed there to be another 1%, and then we decided to make the credit against the 1%. I'd just like to know the chronology. I think it's be important to know. The other thing, because I mean, at the end of the day, the policyholder doesn't really pay the tax. I mean, it kind of rolls into the company thing. And is it not true that they pay these taxes in lieu of any income tax?
That is correct.
So I mean,
They
really,
do not
this is an income tax credit for insurance companies. It could be a good thing or a bad thing, but I mean, that's what it is.
That is correct. And that is very common in the industry, but because of the complexities of insurance industry. Yes,
Actually, it's not a sales tax.
that is correct. Right. Right.
Really? All right, Representative Washburn wins the award today. All right. All right.
Thank you. I think, Chairman Martin has helped me understand. I was puzzled at the job incentive at how this tax was creating any incentive for employment. But if they're waiving income tax, then I understand why they would want to do that. Is that correct?
Well, so what the researchers basically said is if you didn't have this deduction, that the premiums would be this special deduction reduces premium costs slightly, and then the additional money results in jobs. The additional money that people have results in jobs. That's how they determined economic activity and the job. And that's not the purpose of this incentive, which is why the job number is so low.
Okay. Thank you.
You were rescued, Representative Washburn. I think Representative Stinson, did you have another question? She rescued you for the newest question.
I promise this is my last one. For me, I'm glad to hear about this. It's just for me personally, I just want people to have life insurance. So, but is it for companies that are just only life insurance, or they're selling automobile insurance and other type of policies, or just life insurance solely?
It's a little more complicated than that. My understanding, and it's been a few years since we've done this audit, which is why I don't remember all of the details, but the larger companies that you're familiar with have subsidiaries that specialize in particular types of insurance. So it may be a national company that sells both, but they have a life insurance company that's specific to that type. And then they have other companies for their other types, but it's kind of a subsidiary level where they are just selling life insurance.
I think with this, I'll be happy to forward our old premium tax report. When I say old, it's like 2 or 3 years ago. It's kind of a primer, explains things. And try to answer a few of these questions, and I'll send that to David Hartman, and he can distribute it.
That'd be great.
Does that
And
work?
you know, it may be confusing enough that we want to ask y'all to come back just to dive into this one in particular. But
Okay. Yeah.
I
You
think all
get
good
it.
questions that we've had, and a lot of clarification on some things. So I appreciate you being here, and all the different university representatives that have come and taken part in this. And I just, you know, before we wrap it up, not to just thank audits, and I know so many in the room, but a lot of our members have participated in different, you know, committees as functions of Ways and Means during the off session. And I just want to thank them for all their hard work. It was I don't think there's a single person in this room that didn't participate in one or more of those. And so we thank you. We look forward to a really good session. And if nothing, does anybody have anything else for the go of the order? No. All right. We'll see you soon. Thank you again. We're adjourned.